All right, good to see you here. And this is it, the final lecture for scientific and statistical reasoning. I hope you've enjoyed things so far, and but we've got one final thing in store for you, which is about qualitative research. It's a bit about qualitative research, but it's also using qualitative research as a way of exploring the boundaries of what we've been teaching you so far in this course, but in the first year in general as well, and the first and second year as well. So basically, what I want you to take away from today's lecture is the following. So if you quit this lecture or close down your computer, you have some sense of what qualitative research is, why people want to do it, and how you could go about doing it. Basically, how you could take the first steps, or you know where to look if you were so inclined. You know what the difference are between qualitative and quantitative approaches, and you can critically relate both approaches to each other, which is an important second step. And finally, we're going to briefly talk about what you should never forget after taking this course in scientific and statistical reasoning. But first of all, we're going to talk about qualitative research. And as I said, it's a bit about informing you about that approach to research. It's also, as I said, exploring the boundary of what we've talked about to you so far. It's about letting you know, hey, there's different stuff out there as well, which is completely different from the approach we've taught you so far. I think it's useful to know that there are other approaches out there to doing research, and it's essential in becoming a critical thinker about doing psychological research that you know, well, this is the approach that has been getting a lot of emphasis in my education, but it's not necessarily the only way of going about things. It allows you to make an informed decision about, should I take this quantitative approach, or perhaps given the type of research questions I'm interested in, I should approach things in a different way, right? So it allows you some more thinking space in your head to think about, well, I could go about it this way, or go about doing it another way, which is a practical choice. But there's a fundamental issue as well, right? We don't just want you to do qualitative research because we tell you to do it that way. No, we want you to consider what is the best approach for you and whether you agree with the stuff we've taught you so far. To be able to wonder whether you agree or not, you should at the very least know that there's an alternative, which is what we're going to talk about today. First, the question, why did you choose to study psychology? I'm really asking, so somebody could provide an answer. I hope you do have one. Even if you're not willing to vocalize it, it helps, right?
Well, apparently we all got issues, right?
Apparently we all got issues. Yeah. But, I mean, do you want to study them?
Now, for me, it's I've always had an interest in people and what drives us, and sort of to know more about that.
All right. So, what drives people? That's interesting. Any other considerations or reasons for studying psychology?
I think in general, helping people with mental issues. Not per se people who are clinically diagnosable, but in general, people with issues.
Right. Thanks. So what drives people was one answer. The other is being better able to help people in a clinical or outside of a clinical situation.
Just being able to do research, to do studies on people.
To be able to do research on people? Is that really why you started out doing psychology? You thought, I want to do research?
Not at the beginning, but now it seems a bit more interesting that I know more about it.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's a good reason to continue studying psychology for sure. Yes. All right. So doing research on people, understanding what drives people, motivates people, and helping people. Right. I think that's about a summary, as good a summary as any, of the reasons my fellow students gave when I was starting as an undergraduate in psychology. We talked about these things mostly in the third year of our studies, and basically my reasons were, I think, a bit more basic or simple than yours. You are being very considerate already, but I would just have answered you if you would ask me back in the day when I still looked like this. This was my membership card. I don't think they hand them out anymore, but they had them at the study organization, and you needed to use them to get your books with a discount. They it was fancy. You had to pay a couple of euros, but it was laminated, right? So that's a plus. Anyway, if you would have asked me why are you here, I would have said I want to better understand people. Yeah, you might have heard this before, right? Or perhaps people close to you might think that was the reason that you were going to study psychology. Maybe it looks familiar, it sounds familiar to you as well, right? You want to better understand people, and that's why, and in so doing, you want to be better able to help them or to do research on them, or anyway, that goes to the core of a lot of reasons that a lot of people offer for why they study psychology. And that brings us to the reason why I ask you this question, because what we've taught you so far doesn't really help you to better understand people. Basically, what we've taught you so far is a lot of stuff about experimental control, about comparing groups, about optimizing test characteristics, right? All the stuff you've talked with Dylan about in September. Emphasis on testing hypotheses, on inferential statistics. Basically all the stuff we've covered in SSR, but also in the first year. So there's an emphasis on comparing groups. There's an emphasis on standardizing research to such a degree that participants are interchangeable except for the group they've been assigned for, right? So except for group membership, we should treat everyone the same or consider everyone the same, right? It's a bit like studying fundamental particles, right? You have a cloud of gas molecules, and we can we can consider each and every molecule as interchangeable. They're all the same, and we're interested in how the group as a whole basically behaves. So there's not a lot of emphasis on understanding an individual. No, it's on, we're teaching you techniques for, well, if all goes well, figuring out what general principles apply to, well, predicting behavior, what general causes apply to human behavior. But perhaps we're missing the point there. Perhaps it's not ideal to consider groups of people as groups of gas molecules completely interchangeable except for the group membership or group assignment in research. Because perhaps it's true that social reality has a meaning and relevance for the people living in it, as Schutz indicated back in the 60s. And perhaps you should ask yourself whether our emphasis on generating or generating purely statistical explanations, or an emphasis on being able to generalize your research results that you found in a group to a population, the standardization of research material, perhaps that limits our view of properly understanding an individual. Perhaps all that standardization of research questions erases out or forces people to answer in categories they wouldn't have come up with themselves. So it gives you, well, it creates the illusion of understanding, but it's an understanding within the boundaries that you yourself have created as a quantitative researcher. And if you're interested in properly understanding people, instead of just basically explaining their behavior in statistical terms or using a regression formula, we should go about things differently. Perhaps if you're really interested in understanding people, you should become a qualitative researcher, because that allows you to answer different types of questions than the stuff we've been talking about so far. So if you're perhaps interested in these are two examples of types of questions, and in better understanding what the impact is of having a chronic disease on your self-image, or on a specific individual self-image, or a specific group of people that have a chronic, perhaps a rare chronic disease, and you're interested in how that has impacted their self-image, and what it's like for them to have a chronic disease and see their self-perception changing over time, then that type of question might be better answerable using qualitative research. Perhaps you're interested in something else. So how does a socially vulnerable person experience the use of online social media? So we're not talking about the effects of using online media. No, we're talking about understanding what it is like for a certain individual, a socially vulnerable person, what the experience of online social media is like for them, which is a different type of question, which might be better suited to be answered using qualitative research. So what I've tried to trigger in you is perhaps to go back to your initial motivation. And if your initial motivation for choosing psychology was similar to mine, or at least to my motivation and what a lot of my peers were saying back in the day when I started my bachelor's in psychology, then you were at least somewhat interested in better understanding people. And you could wonder whether the stuff we've taught you so far actually taps into that desire, right? So does it really allow you to better understand people, or are we doing something else? Or should we be doing something else instead, namely qualitative research? We're going to talk about what it is, qualitative research, and why it allows us to answer those type of questions, or supposedly allows us to answer those type of questions. After which will be, I think, after the break or so, we're going to focus on we're basically going to have a very critical view of the assumptions in qualitative research, but we're also going to look at what we can take on from that qualitative approach. So are there elements of a qualitative approach to psychological research that we can learn from, even if we stick to our usual quantitative methods? So that's basically the goal of this lecture. Getting an idea of what it is, what we can take on board as quantitative researchers, from that qualitative approach, but also to have a critical perspective of that alternative way of doing research. All right, that's it for today.